Welcome to this SSRS Report Builder tutorial. In this video we're going to cover how to use multi-value parameters. We'll start by showing you how you can simply allow multiple values to be entered in a parameter, and then explain how you can test for those multiple values in both query parameters and report filters. We'll show you how you can type in multiple values into a drop-down list, and also how you can provide available values either by typing them in or by returning them from a dataset. Finally, we'll explain how you can display the multiple values you've selected in a single text box in the report so the user can see those values when they export the results. So let's get started. Here's the example we'll aim to create in this video. If you've watched the previous couple of videos in the playlist, it should look fairly familiar to you. We can display a list of films by selecting various criteria from the drop-down list at the top. The difference between this report and the previous ones we've encountered is that this one allows us to select more than one value, so we can do this either by checking the boxes individually, or we can also choose the Select All option to choose all of the items in the list, and then when we choose to view the report, we'll get a list of all of the films matching the criteria we've asked for. If you'd like to follow along with this video, then you'll need a copy of the SSRS Movies database, and just a quick reminder that you can use this video to help you get it set up, and there's a link in that video's description that you can use to download the file you'll need. If you've done that already, I've got a blank report waiting for me in Report Builder, so I'll head over here and start by creating a data source to connect to that movies database. So I can right click on Data Sources and choose Add Data Source. I'll call this one Movies, choose to use an embedded connection pointing to a Microsoft SQL server, and then I can click the Build button to get a bit of help making up the connection string. I'll type in a shortcut to my local host, which is // and then the name of the instance of SQL Server I'm using, which is SQL 2017. I can then select my movies database from my drop-down list further down the bottom of the dialog box, choose Movies, click OK a couple of times, and there's my data source created. Next, I can create the dataset that will populate the table in the main body of the report. So I can right-click on my movies data source and choose Add Dataset. I'll call this one Films, and then use the Query Designer to get some help selecting the various columns I'll need. I'll head to the film table first, and I'll select the title, the release date, and the Oscar wins from there. Then from the genre table, I'll select the genre field, and then from the director table, I'll select the full name field. I can then click OK a couple of times, and then I'll just display a table in the report body. I'll get rid of my page footer first of all by right-clicking and choosing Remove Page Footer, and then delete that placeholder title text box. Then I can right-click into the body of the report and choose to insert a table. I'll just position this up in the top left-hand corner and then assign the various fields to this table, so title, release date, and Oscar wins, and then I can simply drag the extra columns and attach them to the right-hand side of the table, so I'll have genre and full name. I'm just going to change the header text for the full name column to say director, so it's a little bit more obvious what that's showing. Change the column width of the title column, and then also the column widths of the genre and the director name column as well. I also want to make sure that I don't encounter this font rendering bug, which occasionally means that when you run a report, it doesn't display all the text in the table. So I'm going to highlight all the cells in the table and then switch away from the default font to any other, and then back to the default font. I'll do some very basic formatting. I'll change the background colour of the header row and make the font bold, and then apply the date format to the release date column as well. And then if we just give the report a quick check at this point to make sure it's running and displaying some sensible results, that looks okay so far. Next, I'd like to add a basic parameter so that we can filter the table based on the number of Oscars the film has won. I can do this using either a report parameter and a dataset filter, or just a simple query parameter, and I'm going to opt for a query parameter in this first example. So back in the design view, I'm going to right-click on my films dataset and choose Dataset Properties. And then in the select statement, I'm going to head right down to the very end and add a where clause so that I can ask to show films where the film.oscarwins is equal to the value of a parameter whose name I'll just make up on the spot. I'll call it @wins. So I've added the where clause, which says where film Oscar wins equals @wins. Having done that, if I click OK, you'll see that typing in a query parameter creates a corresponding report parameter, which you can see in a couple of places, the parameters folder in the report data window and the parameters panel at the top. I'll make a small modification to the wins parameter. I'm going to double click on that and change its data type so that it matches the data type of the column I'm comparing it with. This isn't strictly speaking necessary for a query parameter. It would be important for a report parameter and a dataset filter, however. And it's good practice anyway to match the data type of your parameter with the data type of the column you're comparing it against. So having done that, I can now click OK. And if I simply run the report, I can type in a value for my wins option. I can type in the number 3 and see all the films with 3 Oscar wins, type in the number 11 and all the films with 11 Oscar wins just by pressing enter. Next, I'd like to change the parameter so that it allows me to type in multiple values. And this part's actually really straightforward. If I head back to the design view, I can double click on the parameter either in the parameters folder in the report data window or in the parameters panel at the top of the screen and simply check the box which says allow multiple values. The problem is, of course, if I click OK and then I run the report, although I can indeed now type in multiple values in this drop-down list, if I expand it, I can type in the number 1 and 5 and 7, pressing enter after each one to build up my list. My filter sadly doesn't respond to those multiple values. When I click View Report, it tells me an error has occurred. And that's because my multi-value parameter now is returning an array of values. So it's not just one single item, it's multiple items collected together in an array. And my my query filter in the where clause simply says show me any film where the Oscar wins is equal to whatever that parameter contains. So I need to modify my query where clause to make sure that it will separate out the individual values I've returned and check if the film's Oscar wins is in that list or that array. So I can click OK and then head back to the design view. I can then right click on my films dataset and choose dataset properties. And then in the where clause down at the bottom, I can change the equals operator to the in operator. And I also must then close the @wins parameter in a set of round brackets. So having done that, if I now click OK, I can run the report again. And I can indeed now type in multiple values. Let's go for 3 and 7 and 9 and then hit the View Report button and I'll see a list of films whose Oscar wins is in that list or in that array. So you can type in multiple values and return sensible results. It's worth demonstrating that you can do the exact same thing using report parameters and dataset filters, although there is one little thing to watch out for. I'm going to head back to the design view and I'm going to right click on my films dataset and choose dataset properties. And then I'm just going to comment out the where clause. I'll type in 2 hyphens, 2 dashes, 2 minus symbols in front of the where clause and the filter that I've added into there. So that comments out those 2 lines so they're no longer active when we run the report. What I can then do is head over to the filters page and click the add button to filter my dataset based on the value of the Oscar wins field. So I'm going to select the Oscar wins field, and in the operator list I've got an option for the in operator, and in the value option I can click the FX button to launch the expression builder, and then from the parameters category I can double click my only available parameter. Now you may notice that something slightly odd happens when you insert a multi-value parameter in the expression builder. Unlike all the other parameters we've encountered on the course so far, this parameter comes along with a number in parentheses at the end of the word value. So remember that our parameter now returns an array, it's returning multiple items. The number in parentheses there indicates which of the values in the array is going to be used for this expression. So although we can select multiple items from this list, we can type in as many items as we like, by default this expression will only refer to the very first item that we enter into that drop-down list parameter. The index of arrays in Visual Basic has a base of 0, so that's why the number 0 appears here rather than the number 1. The first item has a value of 0, and then the second is number 1, etc. Just to show you that this will kind of partially work, let's just click OK at this point and then click OK again. And then if I run the report, we can type in as many different items as we like. Let's type in, I'm going to go for 5, enter 7, enter 9, and then view the report. And although I've typed in multiple items here, I'm only returning values or returning films which match the first item in the array. The simple way to solve this, back in the design view, I'm going to right click on my films dataset and choose dataset properties, head back to the filters page, head back to the expression for the value. You can simply delete the number in parentheses at the end of the value keyword. So that refers to the entire array rather than a single element in it. Having done that, I can click OK and OK again. Run the report, type in some values. I'll go for 5 and 7 and 9 again, and then click View Report, and then we'll see multiple results returned based on the number of Oscar wins we've typed in. Now, although the report parameter and dataset filter do work, I think it makes sense if we have the choice to use query parameters and add our filter to the where clause of the underlying select statement. The problem with the report parameter and dataset filter is that all of the rows from the film table have to be returned to the report before they can be filtered, whereas with the query parameter using the where clause, we can filter the results at the source and only return into the report the rows that we need. So I'm going to go back to the design view, and I'm just going to revert the changes I've made. I'm going to go back to the dataset properties of the films dataset, head to the filters page and delete that filter we've added. Then head back to the query page and uncomment the where clause and the criteria that we've added there, so it goes back to the way it was before. I can then click OK, and the report's now back in its previous state. At the moment, we have a lot of flexibility in which values we type into this multi-value parameter. If I run the report, I can type in a list of pretty much whatever values I like in here. The problem, of course, is that if I don't know what values I'm expecting to find in that column, I don't really know which is a valid option to type in. I can type in as many values as I like, and if they're not valid, I still don't see any results in the report. So it probably makes sense to combine multi-value parameters with a list of available values. If you've watched the previous video in the series, you'll know how to populate available values in a couple of different ways. Let's start just by typing in some options for the Oscar wins. If I head back to the design view, I'm going to then double click on my wins parameter and head over to the available values page. I can then choose to specify some values and then click the add button a few times. Let's add in 4 different rows, and then I can type in both a label and a value for each item in my drop-down list. The label is just what the end user sees. It really does not matter what the label says as long as it's descriptive and the user understands it. The value is very important, however. It must match the data type of the parameter itself, so this is an integer parameter, and it needs to match the values that are being compared with in the dataset query. So I'm asking where the film Oscar wins is equal to a number, so I need to make sure that the values in this list match those items. For this simple example, I'm just going to set the label and the value to the same thing. So I'll just type a few in sequence. You can see what I'm doing here. It's fairly easy and obvious what's going on. So I'm typing in the value 0 through to 3 on each of those rows. If I now click the OK button and then run the report, I can see that in the drop-down list, rather than typing in a value, I can simply check the boxes for the ones I want, and the report will return the selected entries. And I've also got, if I have a very long list, a nice convenient way to select everything by checking the Select All box, and that will return all the results for all of the items in that list. Typing in a list of available values is certainly nice and easy, although a bit time-consuming and tedious, and it works best when you have a list of values that isn't going to change, such as the days of the week or the months of the year. When it's based on a column such as Oscar wins, which has the potential to have a different range in the future, it's difficult to predict what range of numbers I should type in. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll create a query to populate the list of available values based on what values we find in the underlying database. Let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to right-click on my movies data source and choose to add a new data set. I'm going to change this to call it Oscar Wins List, and then I'll use the query designer. Not that I need to do very much in here. All I'm going to do is pick the list of Oscar wins from the film table. I can then click OK. Now, the problem with selecting every single Oscar win from the film table is that this dataset will return 1200 rows. That's one value for every single row in the film table. I just want to select the unique Oscar wins values. So I can do that by adding the distinct keyword to the end of the select keyword. So I can say select distinct Oscar wins. And I'd also like to have those sorted in ascending order of Oscar wins. So I can add an order by clause to the end to say order by, and then let's just copy and paste film.oscarwins to the end. So the entire query looks like so. Having created the query, I can now click OK. And then I can use that Oscar wins list to populate the available values for this wins parameter. I can double click on that, choose available values, get values from a query, select my Oscar wins list, set the value field to Oscar wins and the label field to Oscar wins. It doesn't matter, they're going to show and use the same value. I'll click OK and then run the report again. And this time I can see that my Oscar wins list is populated with a full range of available values from the film table. We can also choose to set some default values for this parameter so that we don't have to select something ourselves when the report first loads. So one way to do that, back in the design view, is to double click on the wins parameter, head to the default values page, and again we could specify the values we want to select by default. So we could add in a couple of rows there. I could add the value 5 for one and 10 for the other. Click OK and then run the report, and I'll see that I've pre-selected the values 5 and 10. It perhaps makes a little more sense, however, to use our data set, which creates the full list of Oscar wins. Let's head back to the design view, go back to the wins parameter, head to default values and choose to get the values from a query. We can use the Oscar wins list, use the Oscar wins value, click OK, and then run the report, and we've pre-selected every possible option from the list, and therefore we show all the films in the table. We can also display the options we've selected for the multi-value parameter somewhere within the report page. You may remember that anything that sits in the parameters panel doesn't appear if you choose to export the report to an alternative format like Word or Excel, for example. So to include the options we've selected in the multi-value parameter, we can head back to the design view, and I'm going to start by adding a page header to the report. So I can right-click off the report body and choose to add a page header. Now previously what we've done in earlier videos in this section is simply dragged the parameter into the page header and then added some extra basic text around the outside of that. Let's just add some extra text. So we can say in this text box, we can say Oscar wins equals, and then this placeholder will refer to the value of the wins parameter. I'll just select the text box and make sure that I've switched away from and then back to the default font to avoid the font rendering bug. And then I'm just going to highlight the placeholder and change its font colour to blue and make it bold, just to make it stand out. Now, if I were to run the report, sadly this isn't going to work. I get an error. And the reason I get an error is because I'm trying to refer to the single scalar value of a drop-down list which has an array selected with multiple values in it. And I can't simply reference one single value in the way that I have just done so. So what we need to do is write an expression that will take the array of values we've selected and join them all together into one single continuous string. I'd like them to appear the way they appear in this list here, so they've got a comma and a space separating each individual entry. Fortunately, there's a function designed to do this exact thing. If I head back to the design view, I can right-click or select first of all the wins parameter placeholder and then right-click onto it and choose expression. If I have a look in the common functions category and then the text section, I'll find in there that there's a function called join. And if you have a quick look at the example shown for the join function, it shows you an example using a multi-value parameter. So almost designed for the purpose we're about to use it for. Let's wrap the join function around the value of our wins parameter. So we can say join and then open some round brackets, parameters wins.value, followed by a comma, and then we can enter some kind of string which will separate the individual values. So here I'd like to open some double quotes, type in a comma and a space, close the double quotes, and then close that set of round brackets. So the entire expression just looks like so. Having done that, I can click OK. And then it doesn't really matter that the name of the placeholder has changed to a generic expression, but if I wanted to, I could right-click. If I select it first, I can right-click on the expression and choose placeholder properties, and then add a label to that so that it tells me that I'm looking at the wins. So that will just make it a little clearer which value I'm referencing here. If I now run the report, we should see that when we first run it, it opens up and it selects all of the Oscar wins because we had them all selected. But if I then select just a handful of values from there, choose to view the report, we'll see the list will update so we can clearly see which values are selected and have generated these results. We can play around a little bit with this expression so that if, for example, we selected every single option from the list, the label doesn't just display a continuous comma-separated list of every value. We could replace that to say all values or all Oscar wins. To do that, we'd need to go back to the design view and then select the wins placeholder, right-click on it and choose expression. I can wrap this expression up in an if statement or an if function to check if the count of options I've selected from this multi-value parameter is equal to the count of items in the Oscar wins list. So to do that, I can add an if function. I can say IIF. If you prefer not to type it in, you can go to the common functions category and choose program flow and then double click to insert it. So I've got IIF and then open some round brackets. At this point, I'm just going to take my join expression down a couple of lines to give myself a bit of space and then indent that a little bit by typing in a few spaces. Below the if at the beginning of the if function, I want to check if the count of items in that parameter is equal to the count of items in that dataset. So I can start by inserting from the parameters list. I can insert my wins parameter. And then you'll see again it's added in the number in parentheses, but I'm going to remove the number and the parentheses and the word value here. Another useful property of a multi-value parameter is the count property, which tells you how many items have been selected. So if that is equal to, and then I want to count the number of items in my Oscar wins list dataset, so I can go to the datasets category. I can make sure I've got my Oscar wins list selected in the middle box, and then double click on whichever option I have available here, sum of Oscar wins. Obviously it's not the sum of Oscar wins that I'm actually interested in, but that's a convenient way to get the syntax written in to refer to an aggregate function for a field in a separate dataset. So once I've got the sum keyword there, I can change that to say count. So I'm counting the number of values in the Oscar wins field in the Oscar wins list dataset. At the end of that logical test, then I can type in a comma and then hit enter to go down to the next line, type in a few more spaces to indent this code a bit. And then if I have selected all the items, I want to display the phrase all values or all Oscar wins or something along those lines. It doesn't really matter exactly what you type in here, as long as you contain that in a set of double quotes. I can then type in a comma at the end of that line and then just close my extra set of round brackets for the if function, and the entire expression should look like so. Having done that, I can click OK. I can then run the report, and once I have all of the items selected, it will say all Oscar wins. But if I select just a handful of options, it will show me only the entries I've selected. Next, I'd like another parameter which allows me to filter the list based on the year in which a film was released. So let's head back to the design view and we'll start by adding an extra criteria to the where clause of our films dataset. I'll right click on films and choose dataset properties, and then in the where clause I can add a new line and say and. Now this is a little trickier than the previous example because we don't actually have the year of the film's release date stored. We need to calculate this using an expression. So fortunately there's an easy function to use to calculate the year from a date. It's called year. So I can type in the word year, open some round brackets, and then I'm going to just copy and paste the film.release date. And then I'll close the round brackets. After that I can say in, and then in another set of round brackets, make up a new parameter name. I'll call this one at release year, and I'll just keep my capitalization consistent as well. So a new criteria where the year of the film release date is in, the new parameter called at release year. So having done that, I can click OK. My new parameter gets created, or a corresponding report parameter gets created to match the query parameter. I can then double click on that to make a couple of small modifications. I'll change the data type to an integer, so the year function returns a whole number. So I'll compare that with an integer field, an integer parameter, and then I will also allow multiple values, and then I can click OK, and then when I run the report, I'll see that I can type in as many different years as I like. So I can type in just a small number here. Oops, let's actually type them in correctly. And then when I view the report, it will find all the films released in any of the years I've typed in. Next, I'd like to set some available values for this drop-down list, and again we'll use a dataset to calculate the distinct release years sorted in descending order so that the most recent one appears at the top. Let's head back to the design view, and then we can right-click on our movies data source and choose Add Dataset. I'll call this dataset Year List, and then I'll start using the query designer just to get a bit of help building up the basic structure. So from my film table, I can select the release date field and then click OK. And then there's quite a few modifications I'll need to make here. First of all, I know that I don't want to select just a list of all the individual release dates. I want to start by saying select distinct, so get some unique values. And then it isn't the full date that I'm interested in, it's the year of the film's release date. So I can add my year function and wrap that around the release date field. I can then assign an alias to that expression so that the column has a name. I'll call this one a release year. And once I've typed that in, I'm going to copy that alias so that I can add an order by clause to the end of the select statement. And I'll say order by release year. And I want this to go in descending order. So I'll say DESC. Having done that, I can click OK. And then I can double click on my release year parameter, head to the available values page and choose get values from a query. I'll choose my year list, select release year for both the value and the label, and then click OK and then run the report. So this time we should now see that we get a list of years populated based on the films that actually live in the film table. So I know that all of those years return a valid result. I can select as many or as few as I like to return the list to the table in the report. We could use that same dataset to populate the default values of the release year parameter, but just to do something slightly different, what I'd like to do instead is set the default value of release year to be the latest year available from the list of films in my film table. This is a little more fiddly than I think it should be. If I head back to the design view, you may remember from earlier videos in this series that you can't simply calculate the maximum value of a field for the default value of a parameter. If I head to the release year parameter, head to default values and choose to specify values, I can add a value and use the expression builder. So I'll use the expression builder, I'll get rid of the null, I'll click on my datasets list, I'll select my year list dataset and then double click the sum of release year. Now of course it's not the sum that I want, it's the maximum value from that field. So the full expression looks like so. It doesn't really matter about whether I zoom in because it's not going to work anyway, but if I click OK and OK again, when I run the report, we'll see that an error occurred because I can't refer to a field value to set the default value of a parameter, which is a bit annoying to say the least. And there is a way around it, of course. If I click OK, I can go back to the design view. I'm just going to go back. In fact, we can change the default value in a moment. Let's leave it as it is for now. To do this, I need to create another dataset to calculate the maximum value of the year of the film's release date from the film table. So I'm going to right-click on the movie's data source and choose to add a dataset. You may add multiple minimum and maximum values to this dataset, so I'm going to call this one just a generic min-max values. We may add more to it later on. And then I'll use the query designer to get a bit of help. From the tables folder, I'll select film release date. Then I'm going to enable the group and aggregate option by clicking this button at the top. And then where it says grouped by for the release date, I'm going to change that to say max. And that will give you a max of release date field. So when I click OK, I can see that my query has already inserted the max function, and at the moment it's calculating the maximum release date. What I want to do is calculate the maximum year of the film's release date. So I can do this in a few different ways, but let's nest the year function inside the max function. So I'm going to say, give me the maximum of the year of the film release date, and I'm just going to change the alias that's been added here to say max of release year. So that entire select statement will return one single value, which should be the year 2016. Having done that, I can click OK and then double click my release year parameter again. Head back to the default values page and this time choose to get values from a query. I can choose my min and max values query or dataset and then choose the only available field, the max release year. Having done that, I can click OK and then run the report again. And this time it defaults to the year 2016 and I see films with any number of Oscar wins in that single specific year. Finally, for the release year, I'd like to display the selected values in a label at the top of the report. So I can head back to the design view. The simplest thing to do here, I think, is actually just copy and paste the existing text box. So I can select it, press Ctrl and C to copy it, and Ctrl and V to paste. I can then change the label so that it says release years. And then I can select and right-click on this placeholder, and I'll choose placeholder properties. I'm going to change the label so that it says years. And then I can modify the expression by clicking the FX button at the right-hand side. The basic logic of what I'm doing here is the same, it's just a different set of parameters and datasets I'm referencing. So I want to modify where it says parameters wins.count, I want to change that to refer to my release year parameter instead. So I can say if parameters release year.count. And let me just tidy this up again by adding a couple of blank lines and some spacing. So I then want to refer to not the Oscar wins value from the Oscar wins list. I want to refer to the release year from the year list. So again, I can modify Oscar wins here to say release year. And then I can change the Oscar wins list to say year list. So that's the name of the data set. I then want to change the text I'm displaying from all Oscar wins to all years. I'm going to take that down to the next line as well and add a couple of spaces to neaten it up. Nearly there, just one more line to go. I'm going to split this again so that the join function appears on the next line. And then rather than referring to the parameter wins.value, again, I'm going to refer to the parameters release year.value and join all those values together with a comma and a space between them. So the entire final expression should look like so. And once I've done that, I can click OK. Click OK again, and then run the report to see what result we get. So when I have just one year or just a handful of years selected, I see only the options for the selected years. If I tick the Select All box and click View Report, it replaces that comma-separated list with the phrase All Years instead. Next, I'd like to add another parameter which allows me to filter the films based on which genre they belong to. So to do that, let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to start by right-clicking on the films dataset and choose Dataset Properties. I need to modify my where clause again, so I'm going to go back down to the end of my select statement, add a new line and say and. Zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. Say and. I can refer to the genre name field if I liked here. So I've got the genre table in my query, so I could refer to the genre name, but it's probably more efficient to refer to the genre ID field instead and apply my filter to the list of numbers rather than the list of text. So I'm going to refer to the film.genreID and check to see if that is in a new parameter wrapped up in some round brackets. I'll call this one @genreID. So very similar, the pattern is the same for each parameter we add. If I now click OK, I'll end up with a new corresponding report parameter, which I'm just going to move down to the next line, in fact. And let me just tidy up by deleting these extra columns in the parameters grid. Now I would like to create a dataset which will populate the available values for this parameter. So let's right-click on the movies data source and choose Add Dataset. And I'm going to call this one Genre List. And I'm going to use the Query Designer to pick from the genre table, the genre ID, and the genre. So the genre is what will be displayed to the user in the drop-down list, but the genre ID is the value that will actually be captured by the parameter. I can click OK and then add an order by clause to make sure that my genres are sorted alphabetically. So I can add order by genre.genre. I'll get that correct eventually. There we go. So the extra order by clause just looks like so. And then if I click OK, I can use that dataset to populate my genre ID parameter. So let's double click on the genre ID, and I'm going to change its prompt to say just genre. I'll change its data type to say integer, because that's the type of data I'm going to store in the parameter. And I'm going to allow multiple values. We can head to the available values page, and we can choose to get values from a query. We can set the dataset, quite a long list now, but we'll go for the genre list dataset. The value field will be genre ID, the label will be genre. And while I'm here, I'm also going to set the default values by using that exact same query. So we'll select all the genres by default. So I'm going to go to my genre list dataset and choose the genre ID. Having done that, I can click OK and then run the report, and I'll find that I automatically select all the genres from the list. So I see all the films with any number of Oscar wins made in that year, or indeed in any years if that's what I choose. Finally, for the genre parameter, I'd like to display the list of selected values in a label at the top of the report again. So let's head back to the design view, and I'm just going to copy and paste the release years parameter, or sorry, the release years text box. Let's not waste any time constructing this from scratch. We can just use the existing one as the basis. So I'll modify the label release years to say genres, and then I can click on the placeholder currently called years, right click on that and choose placeholder properties. I'll change the label of that to say genres as well, and then I can click the FX button to get into the expression which populates this bit of text. I'll just start by tidying up and moving the various arguments of my if function onto separate lines, just to make it a little easier to read. And then think about the things we need to change. First of all, the parameter whose count I'm testing isn't the release year parameter, that's the genre ID parameter. So I can change parameters release year to parameters genre ID. The field I'm counting the values of in my dataset isn't the release year in the year list. I want to count either of the two fields in the genre list dataset. So I'm going to change release year here to say genre ID, and make sure that I'm referring to the correct dataset, which is called genre list. So assuming I have selected everything from the genre list, I want to display all genres. Otherwise, I want to join together some values from the genre ID parameter. So let's change the release year parameter to say genre ID. Now at the moment this still says value, and if you've watched the previous videos you'll know what will happen when I click OK and OK again and run the report, and if I select not all the genres, if I just select a handful of them, I can see that I don't get the list of genre names, I just get the list of the genre IDs, because I've referred to the value of the genre parameter, not its label. So in the previous two parameters, the label and the value were the same. This is the first example where our label and value don't match. So I'm going to go back to the design view, and then I'm going to right click on my genres placeholder, choose expression, and then just change the final value to the label property instead. Having done that, I can click OK, run the report, and then if I select a handful of genres again, click the View Report button, I'll see that the list now shows me the actual names of the genres rather than their IDs. Okay, just one more parameter to go for this report. I'd like to be able to select from a list of directors for my final parameter, and just for a bit of variety and a bit of a reminder, we'll use a report parameter and a dataset filter to do this. Let's head back to the design view, and I'll start by creating the dataset which is going to populate this list first. So I'm going to right click on my movies data source and choose Add Dataset, and I'll change the dataset name to say Director List. And then I can use the query designer to pick just a couple of fields from the director table. So I'll go with the director ID and the full name. Once I've clicked OK, I'm also going to add an order by clause to make sure that my directors are sorted alphabetically by their full name, and I'm just going to copy and paste that field rather than type it in again. So that's what the select statement looks like. And then I can click OK. Having done that, I can add a parameter. So I'm not going to do this by writing a new criteria in the where clause of my query. I'm going to right click in the parameters grid and choose to add a new report parameter first. I'll call this one director ID, and I'll change the prompt just to say directors or director. Let's go directors. The data type is going to be an integer. Remember, it's the director ID whose value I'm going to capture. I am then going to make sure I've allowed multiple values, and I'm going to choose to set the available values using that query I've just created. So I'll get values from a query. I'll choose my director list dataset. The value field will be director ID, and the label field will be full name. While I'm here, I'll also set the default values by getting the value from that same query. So I'll choose director list and set the value to director ID. I can then click OK. Next, I want to add a filter to my films dataset, or I could also add the filter to the table as well, in fact, using TableX properties. But as all my filters are currently on the films dataset, it kind of makes sense to add it here as well. In order to create a dataset filter that references the director ID field, I've got to make sure that that field exists in the select statement. So I'm going to right-click Films and choose Dataset Properties. And then I'm going to make sure that I've got one of the director ID fields in this select list. It doesn't matter whether this comes from the director table or the film table. Film is slightly shorter to type, so I'll say film.director ID. So that's that field added to the select list. I've then got to click OK to update the field list to make sure that that's included and that the expression builder will now recognize it and make it available. So I'm going to right click onto the films dataset again and then choose Dataset Properties. Head onto the filters page, add a filter. From the expression drop-down list, I can select my newly added director ID field, change the operator to say in, and then for the value, click the FX button to launch the expression builder. I'll head over to my parameters category and double click the director ID parameter, and then I'll just make sure to delete the 0 and the open and close parentheses, so I'm referring to the entire array of values selected in that parameter. I can then click OK and OK again and run the report, and I should see that it immediately loads with all of the directors selected, so I'm therefore seeing all the films from the year from the release year, or if I select all the years, again I'll select all the films from any year with any number of wins in any genre with any director. Just to complete the picture, I'd like to add one final label to the header section of the report to show the list of selected directors, but we'll have a little twist on that technique for this particular example. Let's head back to the design view and we'll start by copying and pasting one of the previous examples that we've done so far. So I'll copy and paste the genres text box, position that just below, and then I can change the label to say directors, and then I can click on the placeholder, right click on it and choose placeholder properties. I'll change its name or its label to say directors here again, and then click the FX button to launch the expression builder. Just to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to tidy up by moving these individual arguments down to the different lines, and then I want to modify the parameter whose count I'm testing is the director ID parameter, not the genre ID. I'm counting the director ID value in the director list dataset. And if those two are the same, I want to display the text all directors. If those values aren't the same, I want to join the label of the director ID parameter so that I see all the director names in a comma separated list. So the final expression should look like so. Having done that, I'm going to click OK and OK again. And then if I run the report, just tidy up a tiny little bit, run the report, we'll see that if I've got all the directors selected, it shows me all directors. If I have just a handful of directors selected, I'll just choose all years as well. When I view the report, I see just that short list of director names. The one small problem with this is if I select all the directors and then I choose to untick any single one of them, of course that now means that I haven't got all the directors selected, and if I hit view report, I'll get a comma separated list of all but one director, which is perhaps a little excessive for what I'm trying to do here. I think what might make more sense is to set a limit on how many director names get concatenated in a comma separated list. Let's arbitrarily set it to a maximum of 10. So if I select all directors, then I want to see the phrase all directors. If I select 10 or fewer, I want to see the list of directors with a comma separated list. More than 10, and it should say something like more than 10 directors selected. So just to finish this off, let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to select and then right click on my directors placeholder and jump straight to the expression. When you have multiple conditions to test for, although you can write nested if functions, I find it easier and preferable to use the switch function instead. Again, you can find the switch function in the same category, program flow, as the if function exists within. The nice thing about the switch function is it allows you to ask as many questions as you like and return an answer for each question without having to nest any functions at all. So I'll change the word if to the word switch, and then the first part is actually correct. If the count of items I've selected in the director ID parameter is equal to the count of items in that director list dataset, then show me the phrase all directors. I'm just going to move that back a line. What I'd then like to do is check to see if the count of items in the parameter is greater than 10. And if so, I'd like a separate phrase to say more than 10 directors selected. So I'm going to give myself a blank line here by typing in enter. And then I'm just going to copy the parameters directID.count, paste that in and check to see if that's greater than 10, type in a comma, and then add a new phrase to say more than 10 directors selected. I can then close the double quotes and type in another comma. Then for the last line, I've got to make sure I've got a pair of arguments for each condition I'm testing for. So there always must be a question and an answer in a switch function. Again, we've got a video earlier in this series that explains all there is to know about the switch function. One quick simple way for the final argument, for the final logical test, if I reach this stage, whatever I test should return true anyway. So I haven't got everything selected and I haven't got more than 10 selected. So rather than explicitly testing if I've got 10 or less, I can just default this to true. That would be the result anyway. Type in a comma and then say, well, join the selected items together into a comma separated list. So there's the final expression. It's quite a lot of effort to do this sort of thing, but hopefully you'll feel it's worth it. If I finally click OK and then run the report one more time, I've got all of my directors selected. Let's select all the years as well. Then if I change the directors to, in fact, let's just uncheck a single director. It should say more than 10 selected. It does. And then if I check them all and then uncheck them and just select a handful, just 3 or 4 just to check, I should get my comma separated list of items I've selected. So there we go, that's how to create multi-value parameters in your Report Builder reports. Hope you found that one useful. Thanks for watching, see you next time.